Coming up on Arirang News, President Jaein calls for a bigger, more active role from the financial sector in improving people's lives. At the same time, he urges Parliament to get back to work and pass the supplementary spending bill meant to address issues such as unemployment. The White House has confirmed that President Trump will be coming to Seoul late next month to meet with President Moon, either on his way to or from the G20 in Japan. High on the agenda will be the nuclear talks with the North. And to the relief of Korean automakers, reports say the U.S. is delaying its new tariffs on cars. To top it off, Korea is expected to be exempt from the tariffs when they do take effect. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for joining us on our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. President Trump will be coming to Seoul several weeks from now to meet with President Moon. They'll be looking for a way to get denuclearization back on track, but can they do it? Shin Se-min reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump will make a stop in Seoul in late June during his trip to Asia for the G20 summit in Osaka, as concerns simmer that nuclear talks with North Korea are on the brink of breaking down.
The leaders of South Korea and the U.S. will discuss the nuclear negotiations with the spirit of close cooperation, as well as ways to strengthen their bilateral alliance.
The White House confirmed President Trump's trip to Seoul and said the leaders will continue their close coordination on efforts to achieve the final, fully verified denuclearization of North Korea. A spokesperson for South Korea's presidential office added that a detailed schedule for what will be their 8th summit is still in the works, an indication that it's still unclear whether Trump will visit Seoul before or after the G20 summit in Japan, a meeting that's scheduled for 2 days from June 28th. The announcement of President Trump's visit to Seoul comes after Pyongyang's recent test firing of missiles and projectiles. The regime's launching of short-range missiles are believed to have violated international restrictions championed by the U.S. president. North Korea has tested 2 short-range missiles and fired a series of projectiles this month, the first such move by North Korea since it tested an intercontinental ballistic missile in late 2017. President Moon said the regime's actions are a way of showing its discontent that the second North Korea-U.S. summit in February ended with no deal. President Trump, too, downplayed the missile tests, calling the launches very standard stuff, and said he didn't consider them a breach of trust. With President Moon having already proposed another inter-Korean summit shortly after the Moon-Trump meeting in Washington last month, President Trump's visit to Seoul could serve as a catalyst in bringing about a third North Korea-U.S. summit in the near future, perhaps breathing fresh life into the stalled nuclear negotiations. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with the Russian president earlier this week. And as a follow-up, the top American and Russian nuclear envoys spoke on the phone Wednesday about a goal they say they share, North Korea's denuclearization. Lee Seung-jae reports.
U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Stephen Biegun and Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Igor Morgulov held their phone conversation Wednesday as part of continued U.S.-Russia discussions on their shared goal of the denuclearization of North Korea, including on the need to maintain full implementation and enforcement of existing sanctions until the final, fully verified denuclearization of North Korea is achieved. According to Russia's foreign ministry, the two sides also discussed ways to further promote the political and diplomatic process. The conversation comes as Washington and Moscow have shown gaps in their view of how denuclearization should be achieved. The U.S. insists on continuing pressure through sanctions, while Moscow advocates an easing of the sanctions in exchange for denuclearization steps. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who held a near 2-hour-long meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday, says they spoke at length about North Korea after Putin held a summit last month with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Vladivostok. The top U.S. diplomat added the United States and Russia share the same goals on North Korea and hopes the two sides can find ways that work for everyone. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The U.S. recently seized a North Korean cargo ship for illegally shipping coal, but it seems the North is still trying to evade the international sanctions on those shipments. Analyzing satellite images, Voice of America reports that 2 large cargo ships were seen Sunday at North Korea's Nampo Port, one of the regime's main coal loading docks. By Tuesday, they were gone. The report says at least 7 cargo ships have come in and out of Nampo between April 16th and May 14th. The panel of experts at the UN Security Council reports that despite the sanctions, North Korea has increased the number of ship-to-ship transfers of coal and oil. Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon has called on the National Assembly to start deliberations on the government's extra budget proposal. Speaking in a meeting Thursday with cabinet ministers, Lee said that despite their differences, lawmakers still need to get to work on the bill worth around $5.6 billion, which was submitted 3 weeks ago. He said the budget is needed to tackle downside economic risks and to deal with the aftermath of recent natural disasters. He also advised relevant ministries to come up with measures to minimize the impact of heat waves and typhoons this summer and called on officials to keep up the government's drive to deregulate. South Korea's chief prosecutor, Moon Moo-il, has reiterated that he opposes a pending bill that would redistribute investigative powers away from the prosecution. Moon says it does not conform to democratic principles and could encroach on people's basic rights. The reform bill was put on fast track at the National Assembly last month. It would give police the authority to close investigations and take away the prosecution's authority to control investigations by the police. At a press conference Thursday morning, Moon also vowed to build public trust by making systematic changes to the ways the prosecution handles investigations. He said the prosecution will scale down and decentralize its monopolistic investigative power. Already, he said, it's working to split up its powers over criminal investigations into certain matters such as narcotics and tax evasion. The Seoul Metropolitan Government has opened up a century of its records to the public at a new archive. More than 1 million city records can be reviewed there. Plus, there'll be exhibitions and educational programs. Lee Min-sun reports.
After 2 months of test operations, the Seoul Metropolitan Archives officially opened its doors on Wednesday. Located at Seoul Innovation Park in the northwest of the city, the archives can hold up to 1.3 million public records, including the city's records from the past century and the ones expected to be made over the next 30 years. The archives include administrative documents, photos, and videos, as well as social records like memorial ribbons and writings left at Seoul Plaza's memorial altar after the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. Later this year, over 100,000 records stored at a site in Gyeongsang-buk-do province since 1968 will be transferred to the Seoul Metropolitan Archives. The archives will also hold regular exhibitions, classes, and student field trips. The basement up to the 3rd floor of the archives is open to the public, and the 4th floor will be used for the experts to restore damaged records. Seoul Metropolitan Archives will be open from Tuesdays to Sundays, except on New Year's Day, Lunar New Year's Day, and Chuseok. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
President Jaein has called for more drastic financial measures in areas where people have not been able to feel improvements in their quality of life. President Moon chaired a top-level finance strategy meeting on Thursday for the 3rd time under his administration to discuss financial strategies for the future. He emphasized the need to actively address the issue of employment and social safety nets. Here's the president.
그러나 지금의 상황은 저성장과 양극화, 일자리, 저출산 고령화 등 우리 사회의 구조적 문제 해결이 매우 시급합니다. 재정의 과감한 역할이 어느 때보다 요구되는 시점입니다. 지금 재정이 적극적으로 대응하지 않는다면 가까운 미래에 오히려 더 큰 비용을 지불하게 될 것입니다.
The president reiterated the need to get Parliament working normally again, saying that the longer the extra budget plan is delayed, the less effective it'll be. Today's meeting brings together the entire cabinet, including Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun and Finance Minister Hong Nam-ki, as well as officials from major economic organizations and the Blue House. According to the presidential spokesperson, it's being held for the first time at Sejong City to cement the city's place as a center of administration. South Korean automakers might be able to breathe easier for a while. Reports say the U.S. plans to delay new tariffs on cars by up to 6 months. And furthermore, they say South Korea is one of the countries that will be exempt. Ko Jun-hee reports.
The Trump administration has been reviewing tariffs of up to 25% on imported vehicles like those from South Korea, citing job losses and negative effects on the domestic auto industry. President Trump was supposed to make a decision on this issue by May 18th. And South Korean car makers are breathing a sigh of relief after Bloomberg reported that the U.S. not only plans to postpone the decision, but also exempt South Korea from any future tariffs. Bloomberg cited a draft executive order and said South Korea, Canada, and Mexico are exempt from the new levies. The revised Seoul-Washington Free Trade Agreement came into force in January. And analysts say this might have settled the possible trade disputes in advance. The South Korean government has been continuously expressing the nation's stance on auto tariffs to the U.S. For instance, Seoul's Trade Minister Yoo Myung-hee met with U.S. officials this week in Washington, calling for an exemption from the potential tariffs. The situation is similar for Canada and Mexico because the two countries renegotiated the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, and are preparing for a new United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. Meanwhile, Bloomberg added President Trump will give the European Union and Japan 180 days to agree to a deal that would limit or restrict auto imports into the U.S. Analysts say this decision will avoid blowing up Washington's trade relations with the EU and Japan, amid an escalation of trade tensions between the U.S. and China. Ko Jun-hee, Arirang News.
South Korea's exports continue to go down overall, but its production and exports of cars rose last month. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy says auto output went up 5% on month in April to around 372,000 units. That was thanks to one extra working day during that period and new models, including Hyundai Motors Palisade. On year, auto exports increased 3% thanks to solid sales in North America and Europe. Sales in Korea of domestically made cars went up, but overall car sales were down 3.6% on year because of a fall in sales of imports. It's time now for an in-depth look at the global markets this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Kiwoom Securities. Mr. Yu, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me today.
So we just heard that the U.S. Decision on auto tariffs is being put off by 6 months for several countries. That helped send Wall Street higher overnight. The Dow, the S&P up about 0.5%. Where are the global markets this afternoon?
Yes, in general, global market seems to be fairly stable, especially with the U.S. market recovering yesterday. At the beginning, the China and U.S. economy numbers came out, which was quite soft relative to the expectations. And because of that, market started with a very weak trend, but was able to recover at the end of the market. U.S. industrial productions came in at, China's industrial production came in at 5.4% growth. Retail sales were up about 7.2%. Fixed asset investment rose 6.1%, but all came in below expectations. Also, the U.S. retail sales came in, which actually fell 0.2% month on month, where expectation was 0.2% growth. So this was coming in with a post-tariff hike numbers, so people were quite concerned. But nevertheless, because of these weak numbers, people are expecting that the policy easing from the both sides of the economies will be quite significant. So there's a possibility of rate cut from the both countries, as well as additional fiscal expansion. And because of that expectations, market was able to recover, where U.S. market rose 0.58% yesterday for the S&P and 1.13% rise for NASDAQ.
Well, here in Korea, we saw the Kospi start to slide pretty much just after today's opening, ending up far lower than it started out. What happened there?
Right. As you said, the Korean market closed with Kospi going down 1.2% and the Kosdaq went down 1.65%. Clearly, the economic weakness that we saw from the both sides of U.S. and China are putting pressure on the Korean market. And even though there was a news about the no tariff on cars for Korea for the next 6 months, this was definitely positive news. But still, most of the other sectors were going down. Main reason for that is because of continuation of the trade war can have negative impact on Korea. People are concerned about that, as well as economic growth numbers are not really coming through at this point in time. Also, there is a possibility of rate cut that's happening in the future. So people are selling equities and buying bonds. Even the foreign investors were actually selling quite significant amount of Korean equity of 300 billion won worth of Kospi and 150 billion won worth of Kosdaq. So clearly the currency are moving into 1190 territories, and most of the people are expecting that might go up to 1200. So on that trend, foreign investors are selling the Korean market, as well as a concern about the economic growth that is all affecting negatively on Kospi trend today.
Right. Well, let's talk about the Huawei issue making headlines today. President Trump has basically banned U.S. companies from using Huawei equipment. So this roller coaster ride goes on between the two powers. How are investors taking this move?
Right. I think it's already as expected. As we know, the trade war or the trade dispute is all about the technology advancement and keeping the intellectual property rights related to all these sectors. And clearly this Huawei is in front of that. U.S. is focusing about winning the fourth industrial revolution competition with China. So Trump have said that the U.S. will win the 5G investment. It is most important for the factor for the future. That's what Trump and U.S. is saying that. So they want to be the number one in this technology-driven businesses globally. And U.S. is willing to do all means necessary to win that war on technology. U.S. is probably most likely to win that, especially on the tech sector, because the market size of the tech sector is the biggest for U.S., and we estimate that to be more than 50% of the global market. So therefore, such focus by the government as well as the heavy investment made by that sector, we think that U.S. will continue to win in this segmentation. We believe that because of that, U.S. NASDAQ market will continue to go up in the future. Of course, protectionism will put pressure on the equity market in general. But key factor level here is that how much investments are made on this sector, particularly related to the 5Gs and fourth industrial revolutions. And because of the heavy investment that's made, both countries, China and U.S., the market size will continue to grow. And therefore, the market or the sector index should be going up accordingly.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, that's where we're going to have to leave it today. Thanks so much for coming on, as always.
Thank you very much.
Let's stay with the executive order from President Trump that banned American companies from using foreign-made technology deemed to be a national security threat, effectively banning them from buying from the Chinese telecom giant Huawei. Cha Sang-mi has the latest.
Amid failed trade negotiations between Washington and Beijing, U.S. President Donald Trump signed an executive order Wednesday local time, barring U.S. companies from using foreign-made telecoms equipment that could pose a threat to national security. The order is aimed at protecting America from what it calls foreign adversaries, who are actively and increasingly creating and exploiting vulnerabilities in information and telecommunication technology infrastructure and services in the United States. It bans transactions posing an unacceptable risk to the national security, but did not directly point to any nation. However, shortly after it was issued, the Commerce Department added Huawei to its so-called entity list of 70 affiliates, meaning the Chinese tech giant would require U.S. government approval in order to purchase American technology. U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross defended Trump's order, saying the move will prevent American technology from being used by foreign-owned entities in ways that potentially undermine U.S. national security or foreign policy interests. Officials from the Commerce Department said they will write the rules for reviewing transactions over the next 150 days to back up the order. Huawei responded to the move by saying restricting Huawei from doing business will not make the U.S. more secure or stronger. The move comes as the Trump administration has been lobbying other countries not to use Huawei's 5G equipment amid U.S.-China trade tensions. Huawei's finance chief Meng Wanzhou has also been detained in Canada since December, accused of breaching U.S. sanctions on Iran. 차상미, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, President Trump is expected to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping next month at the G20 summit. But ahead of that, it looks like Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin will be going back to Beijing at some point to continue the trade talks. At a congressional hearing on Wednesday, Mnuchin said the most recent talks with Chinese officials in Washington were constructive, but there's still a lot of work to do before they've got a deal. Mnuchin didn't say exactly when he'll be going to China, but he did say U.S. negotiators will most likely go at some point in the near future. The end is in sight for a legal battle over the sale 7 years ago of KEB, formerly known as Korea Exchange Bank. Hana Financial Group has successfully fended off a lawsuit over the deal brought against it by American private equity firm Lone Star Funds. Hana had bought KEB from Lone Star in 2012, but Lone Star claimed Hana paid an artificially low price and it took Hana to the International Court of Arbitration. The court, however, informed Hana on Wednesday that it has dismissed the case. Lone Star had demanded $1.4 billion in compensation. It's also claimed that the Korean government interfered in the deal by refusing to approve it in order to lower the price. A ruling in that case against the government is expected in 4 to 5 months. For the first time in 3 years, a South Korean singer took to the stage in Beijing. The Chinese government had banned all K-pop performances in China after Seoul deployed the U.S. missile defense system THAAD. But it seems Beijing might be relenting. Kim Yo-sun reports.
World-famous K-pop singer Jaein was invited to perform at the Asian Cultural Carnival held in Beijing on Wednesday evening on the sidelines of the Conference on Dialogue of Asian Civilizations. It is being seen as a sign China could be lifting its ban on South Korean contents that was imposed in 2016 following Seoul's deployment of the THAAD missile defense system. This is the first time a Korean celebrity has taken to the stage to perform at an official event since then. Jaein performed side-by-side with Singapore's Lin Junjie, a famous singer in mainland China. The event drew over 30,000 people, including high-level Chinese government officials and various international delegations. It was also televised live on China Central Television. Chinese President Xi Jinping also attended the event, stressing in his congratulatory speech that Beijing can contribute to making a beautiful future together with Asia and the rest of the world. The fact a K-pop star took part in a large-scale event in Beijing could have significant meaning going forward. Analysts also predict that with the Chinese leader's possible visit to Seoul before the end of the year, K-pop stars could be able to perform in China again. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
Korean culture, including K-pop and the local cuisine, is drawing a rising number of foreign visitors to the country. It can be tough sometimes if you don't speak the language, but for almost 20 years, there's been an interpretation service by phone and nowadays by smartphone app. Our Won Jung-hwan reports.
What if you aren't fluent in Korean, but you still need to arrange a contract in a local mobile phone service center?
Yeah, I would like to make a contract with this company of mobile phones because I would like to have a free calls and unlimited giga.
Okay, and do you have the ARG card with you?
Yeah.
Okay, can you give this one back to a Korean man, please?
When a speaker is struggling to understand the language, they can dial BBB Korea to ask for an interpretation through a device everyone carries, a mobile phone. From asking for directions to getting medical information in emergencies, the volunteers of BBB deliver important messages in real time 24 hours a day. A person who is currently in charge of running the service explains how BBB Korea has been helping people for more than 17 years.
We have some guidelines in which we block people who intend to use our service for their own profit. Our existence is purely for the people who need urgent help, and for those who cannot afford an interpretation in real time due to cost or situation.
According to BBB, a call is received every 10 minutes. Over the course of a year, more than 100,000 calls are fielded by over 4,500 volunteers who can speak 20 languages. Since 2013, a smartphone application has also been available. The combination of digital technology with analog sensibility is what led BBB here today. By incorporating technology with the knowledge and thoughtful minds of the volunteers, BBB has been able to create a bridge to connect speakers of different languages in Korea. 원정환, 아리랑 뉴스.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thanks for being with us. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.